What if your dream home was a lie? Its walls hiding a truth that could break you. Peter Ward thought he found peace, but his house whispers of blood and betrayal. Every scratch, every shadow, pulls him deeper into a nightmare he can't escape. A family's love battles a killer's hate, and reality frays under the weight of grief. Will he uncover the secret before the house claims him forever? Dare to step into the dream house where the past never sleeps. The October wind tore through Fairview, Connecticut, rattling the bare branches like brittle bones. Will Attenton stood on the frost-crusted lawn of his new home, a colonial house that loomed against the slate-gray sky. Its ivy-clad walls clung to the weathered bricks, as if holding the house together by force of will. He shivered, his breath a fleeting mist, and forced his lips into a smile. His daughters, Trish and Dee Dee, darted through the fallen leaves, their laughter sharp and fleeting in the stillness. Libby, his wife, stepped from the porch, her auburn hair catching the last rays of a dying sun. Her hand found his, her fingers warm but trembling, as if sensing something he couldn't. This was their refuge, their escape from the relentless churn of New York City. Will had left his editor's desk behind, trading deadlines for the quiet to write his novel. Libby, an artist, dreamed of filling the attic with paintings, each stroke a burst of life. The house was ancient, its gabled roof sagging under the weight of untold winters. Its tall windows glinted like watchful eyes, reflecting the world in distorted shards. Will turned the key in the lock, the door groaning as if reluctant to open. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and a faint, cloying sweetness, like wilted roses. Libby ran her fingers along the staircase banister, its carvings worn smooth by decades of hands. Trish, 7 and fearless, bolted upstairs, claiming a bedroom with a view of the skeletal oaks. Dee Dee, 5 and cautious, clung to Will's leg, her eyes darting to the shadowed corners. This was their new beginning, their sanctuary from a world too loud, too fast. Will wanted to believe it, but a chill settled in his bones, sharp and unyielding. The house felt alive, its silence not empty, but waiting, coiled with intent. That first night, Will lay awake, the darkness a heavy shroud around him. Libby slept beside him, her breathing soft but uneven, as if caught in a restless dream. He stared at the ceiling, its plaster crisscrossed with cracks like veins under skin. A sound sliced through the quiet, a low, deliberate scratching, like nails carving into wood. His heart lurched, pounding against his ribs. It came from the hallway, steady and purposeful, as if etching a message into the house itself. He eased from bed, the floorboards cold and creaking under his bare feet. The hallway was a void, the moonlight cutting through in jagged slants, painting the walls with silver. The scratching ceased as he neared, leaving a silence that buzzed in his ears. He flipped the light switch, his breath catching at the sight of an empty corridor. Morning brought no relief. Will found a mark on the wall near the staircase, a thin, jagged scratch in the cream paint. He touched it, his fingers trembling at its precision, its quiet menace. Libby, humming in the kitchen as she unpacked dishes, laughed when he showed her. She called it a quirk, a scar from the house's long, storied life. But Will saw intent in the mark, a whisper of something deliberate, something alive. He spent the day hauling boxes, his eyes flicking to the scratch with every pass. By dusk, another appeared, higher on the staircase, deeper and more vicious. He traced its edges, his pulse hammering as he felt the shape of a letter. An L, rough but unmistakable. The house was speaking, its voice sharp enough to cut. The neighborhood was a ghost town, its stillness unnatural, oppressive. Will waved to Ann Patterson, their neighbor across the street, as she stood by her mailbox. Her smile was a brittle mask, her eyes sliding away like shadows on water. He brushed it off, blaming small-town wariness, but doubt coiled in his gut. Trish returned from exploring the yard, her face drained of color, her voice a whisper. She spoke of a shadow in the basement window, not a reflection, but a figure, still and watching. Will's throat tightened, but he knelt beside her, forcing a calm he didn't feel. He descended to the basement, the air thick with the stench of damp earth and mildew. The windows were clouded with grime, showing only his own distorted face. He told Trish it was her imagination, but his voice wavered, betraying him. Libby threw herself into claiming the house, her optimism a fragile shield. She hung family photos, their frozen smiles clashing with the faded floral wallpaper. She painted the dining room a soft blue, her brushstrokes steady despite the chill that lingered. Will tried to mirror her hope, but the scratches multiplied, relentless. They formed patterns now, letters that teased at words he couldn't yet decipher. He photographed them, his hands unsteady as he pored over the images in his study. The house seemed to taunt him, its walls tightening with each new mark. One night, as they ate dinner, the chandelier flickered, its light stuttering like a failing heartbeat. Trish dropped her fork, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't name. Dee Dee whispered of footsteps upstairs, soft but insistent, pacing when the house was empty. Will laughed, the sound hollow, echoing in his throat. He climbed the stairs later, his flashlight's beam a frail sword against the dark. The hallway was empty, but the air was heavy, charged with the weight of unseen eyes. He checked each room, finding only dust and shadows that seemed to shift when he turned. In the girl's room, his light caught a drawing half hidden under a rug. It was crude, scrawled in black crayon, showing a family with faces obliterated by frantic, violent scribbles. His stomach churned, the paper trembling in his hands. The girls hadn't drawn this. He knew their careful lines, their bright colors. He hid it in his pocket, unwilling to alarm Libby, unwilling to voice his fear. But when he returned to bed, she was awake, staring at the wall. Her eyes were distant, as if caught in a vision beyond the room. He whispered her name, and she turned, her smile too quick, too fragile. She claimed she was fine, but her voice was a thread, ready to snap. Will's dreams that night were jagged, filled with screams and blood-soaked floors. He saw a woman running through the house, her face blurred but achingly familiar. The walls pulsed with grief, the air thick with loss. He woke choking on a scream, his skin slick with sweat. Libby stirred, her hand cold as it grazed his arm. She asked about his dream, her voice soft but weighted with something unspoken. He lied, unable to shape the terror into words. Will invited Anne over, desperate to pierce the veil of silence. She arrived with a forced smile, clutching a bottle of cheap red wine. Her compliments about the house were hollow, her eyes darting to the corners, the doorways. He asked about the previous owners, his tone light but edged with need. Anne's face tightened, her fingers twisting the stem of her glass until it nearly snapped. She said the house had been empty for years, nothing more to tell. But her voice cracked, a fissure in her calm. As she left, she paused on the porch, glancing back at the house with a look of dread. Will watched her go, the wind carrying a faint, mournful hum, like a voice calling from the dark. He turned, but the porch was empty, the house silent, yet watchful. The house was no longer a home, but a presence, a keeper of truths too heavy to bear. Will found a toy in the attic, a porcelain doll with cracked, unseeing eyes, its dress yellowed and brittle. It wasn't the girl's, yet it stirred a pang of recognition, sharp and unplaceable. He showed it to Libby, who flinched, her eyes flickering with something like fear. She dismissed it as a relic, left by some long-gone tenant. But the noises grew bolder, whispers in the walls, footsteps circling in the dead of night. Will's grip on reality frayed, his mind a battlefield of doubt and dread. Was the house alive, its walls pulsing with malice? Or was he unraveling, broken by the weight of its secrets? The dream house held its truths close, but they were seeping through, cold and relentless. The November frost tightened its grip on Fairview, encasing the world in a brittle sheen. Will Attenton stood in the dim hallway of the colonial house, staring at the scratches on the wall. They had multiplied overnight, their jagged lines forming a chaotic script across the paint. He traced a new mark, a crude T, his fingers trembling with a mix of dread and fascination. The house was no longer silent. It whispered, its voice a low hum that burrowed into his skull. Libby called from the kitchen, her voice bright but strained, urging him to join her for breakfast. He hesitated, his eyes locked on the marks, as if they might shift if he looked away. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of secrets the house refused to yield. He forced himself to turn, each step toward the kitchen, a of the unknown. The dream house was watching, and it knew he was listening. Trish and Dee Dee sat at the table, their chatter subdued, their eyes darting to the corners. Libby served pancakes, her smile a fragile mask that cracked when she met Will's gaze. He noticed her hands, once steady, now trembling as she poured syrup. He wanted to ask if she felt it too, the house's pulse, its restless energy. But the girls were watching, their small faces etched with worry, and he swallowed his questions. Trish pushed her plate away, saying the house felt wrong, like it didn't want them there. Dee Dee nodded, whispering about a lady who stood in her doorway at night, silent but sad. Will's stomach twisted, his fork clattering to the table. He forced a laugh, saying old houses creaked and shadows played tricks. But his voice was thin, and the girl's eyes held a truth he couldn't dismiss. The day dragged, each hour heavy with unease. Will tried to write in his study, but the words wouldn't come. His mind snagged on the scratches. He opened his laptop, searching online for the house's history, his fingers hesitant on the keys. The results were sparse, but one article caught his eye, its headline stark: "Tragedy in Fairview Home." His heart thudded as he clicked, the page loading with agonizing slowness. The article was brief, its details chilling. 5 years ago, a family had been murdered in a house on their street. The mother and 2 daughters were killed. The father survived, broken and unstable. The address wasn't listed, but Will's gut screamed it was theirs. He printed the article, the ink smudging under his sweating palms, and hid it in his desk. He confronted Libby that evening, his voice low to spare the girls. He showed her the article, expecting shock, outrage, anything but the calm that settled over her. She read it slowly, her face unreadable, her fingers steady as she folded the paper. She said it was sad, but it didn't mean they should leave. This was their home now, she insisted, her voice soft but resolute. Will stared at her, unsettled by her composure, her lack of fear. Was she hiding something? Or was he seeing shadows where none existed? He pressed, asking why the realtor hadn't told them, why the neighbors avoided their eyes. Libby's smile faltered, her eyes flickering with something, guilt or perhaps sorrow. She turned away, busying herself with dishes, leaving his questions to fester in the air. The noises grew bolder, no longer confined to the night. Will heard murmurs in the walls during the day, faint voices that dissolved when he listened too closely. He found more scratches, now in the girls' room, etching a word: truth. His breath caught, his hands shaking as he photographed the letters. He didn't show Libby, afraid of her calm, afraid of what it meant. Trish began avoiding the upstairs, saying the air felt heavy, like breathing through cloth. Dee Dee stopped sleeping, her eyes ringed with shadows, her whispers of the sad lady constant. Will checked their room nightly, finding nothing but the oppressive weight of the house. He began to doubt his senses, his sanity, his grip on what was real. The dream house was no dream. It was a cage, and he was trapped inside. He visited Ann Patterson, desperate for answers the house wouldn't give. She opened her door reluctantly, her face pale, her eyes wary as they scanned the street. He asked about the murders, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Ann's lips tightened, her fingers clutching the doorframe as if to anchor herself. She said the town didn't speak of it, that some wounds were best left closed. He pressed, mentioning the article, the family, the house that might be theirs. Her eyes widened, a flash of fear breaking through her guard. She told him to stop digging, her voice sharp, almost pleading. The past was gone, she said, and stirring it would only bring pain. She shut the door before he could respond, leaving him alone in the cold. Will's dreams became sharper, more vivid, more cruel. He saw a woman running through the house, her screams tearing at his heart. Blood pooled on the floor, seeping into the wood, staining it forever. Children cried, their voices small and broken, fading into silence. He woke, gasping, his chest tight, his hands clawing at the sheets. Libby was beside him, but her touch felt distant, like a memory rather than flesh. He pulled away, his mind fracturing under the weight of the visions. He began sleeping in the study, the bedroom too full of echoes, too full of her. One night, he found Libby standing in the hallway, motionless, staring at the scratches. She didn't blink, didn't turn, her face blank as if carved from stone. He called her name, his voice trembling in the dark. She turned slowly, her eyes empty, her smile a ghost of itself. She said she was sleepwalking, but her words rang hollow, a lie he couldn't swallow. He began to watch her, noticing the way she moved through the house, as if guided by something unseen. She hummed tunes he didn't recognize, old and mournful, that sent chills down his spine. The girls clung to her, but their eyes held fear, not trust, when they looked at Will. He felt like a stranger in his own home, an intruder in a story not his own. He searched the attic, driven by a need to understand, to break the house's hold. He found a box, hidden under loose floorboards, its wood splintered and damp. Inside was a photograph, faded but clear, a family, smiling, in front of their house. The mother's face was blurred, but her auburn hair was unmistakable. Will's heart stopped, his breath trapped in his throat. It was Libby, or someone so like her it stole his air. The children, 2 girls, mirrored Trish and Dee Dee in ways that defied chance. The man, the father, had Will's eyes, his jaw, his weary smile. He dropped the photo, his hands shaking, his mind screaming against the impossible. He hid the box, unable to face Libby, unable to ask what it meant. The house groaned around him, its walls creaking as if laughing at his fear. He began to notice gaps in his life. His phone rarely rang, his emails went unanswered. It was as if the world beyond the house had faded, leaving only its walls, its whispers. Will returned to the library, his steps hurried, his mind a storm of questions. He dug through archives, his fingers smudging old newsprint as he searched for the truth. He found another article, this one with a name, Peter Ward, the father who survived. The name struck him like a blow, familiar yet alien, a key to a lock he couldn't find. Peter Ward had been institutionalized, deemed unstable after the loss of his family. Will's hands trembled as he read, the words blurring through his tears. He saw Peter's face in a grainy photo, and his world tilted. The man was him, or so close it tore at his sanity. He left the library, the article clutched in his fist, the truth clawing at his mind. The dream house was no longer a mystery. It was a mirror, reflecting a past he couldn't escape. The November air in Fairview grew colder, as if the town itself were exhaling frost. Will Attenton stood in his study, the crumpled article about Peter Ward trembling in his hands. The photograph from the attic haunted him, its blurred faces mirroring his family too closely. He stared at the scratches on the wall, now sprawling across the hallway like a fevered script. The word truth had grown, joined by others. Remember, blood, etched in jagged lines. The house was no longer whispering, it was screaming, its voice a blade in his mind. Libby's laughter drifted from the living room, but it sounded hollow, like an echo from another time. He clutched the article tighter, Peter Ward's name burning into his thoughts. Was he losing his mind, or was the house peeling back a veil he hadn't known existed? The dream house was a labyrinth, and he was running out of paths to follow. Trish and Dee Dee had stopped playing outside, their joy smothered by the house's weight. They sat on the couch, drawing in silence, their crayons moving with mechanical precision. Will glanced at their sketches, his heart lurching at the images, blackened houses, faceless figures. He asked what they were drawing, his voice soft to mask his fear. Trish looked up, her eyes older than her 7 years, and said the house told her to draw it. Dee Dee nodded, whispering that the sad lady wanted them to stay forever. Will's throat closed, his hands clenching into fists. He told them to draw something happy, but his words felt empty, powerless. Libby appeared, her smile too bright, and ushered the girls to the kitchen for cocoa. Her eyes met his, and for a moment they weren't hers. Distant, glassy, like a stranger's. He couldn't stay still, couldn't let the house's voice drown him. He returned to the attic, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. He tore at the floorboards, his nails splintering as he uncovered another hidden box. Inside was a journal, its leather cover cracked, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was his, or so close it stole his breath. It spoke of a man named Peter Ward, of a night when the world ended in blood. The entries were frantic, fragmented, describing screams, a gun, a family torn apart. Will's hands shook as he read, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The final page was a plea. "Find the truth, Peter. Don't let them win." He dropped the journal, his mind reeling, the name Peter echoing like a gunshot. He confronted Libby that night, the journal clutched to his chest. She was in the dining room, arranging flowers in a vase, her movements slow and deliberate. He demanded to know who Peter Ward was, why his face was in the article, the photo. She paused, her fingers hovering over a wilted rose, her face unreadable. She said she didn't know, her voice calm but threaded with something sharp. He slammed the journal on the table, its pages splaying open to reveal his handwriting. Her eyes flickered, a crack in her composure, but she turned away, humming that same mournful tune. He grabbed her arm, his voice breaking as he begged for the truth. She pulled free, her smile gone, her eyes wet with tears she didn't shed. She said he was tired, that the house was playing tricks, but her words rang false. The house grew bolder, its presence a physical weight. Will heard footsteps at all hours, not just pacing but running, as if fleeing something unseen. The whispers in the walls became voices, fragmented but clear. Children crying, a woman pleading. He found more scratches, now in his study, spelling Peter in deep, angry gouges. He photographed them, his hands shaking, his camera lens fogging with his breath. Trish began sleepwalking, her small form drifting to the basement door at night. Dee Dee stopped speaking, her eyes fixed on corners where shadows seemed to linger. Will tried to hold them, to anchor them, but they slipped through his fingers like smoke. He began to see things, flashes of a woman in the hallway, her face blurred but familiar. The house was no longer a cage, it was a mirror, reflecting a truth he couldn't face. He went to Ann Patterson again, his desperation a fire in his chest. She opened her door a crack, her face pale, her eyes red from sleepless nights. He showed her the journal, the article, his voice raw as he demanded answers. She stepped back, her hands trembling, and invited him inside. Her living room was dim, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee. She spoke in a whisper, as if the walls could hear. The house was theirs, she admitted. The Ward family's 5 years ago. Peter Ward's wife and daughters were murdered, a crime that broke the town. Peter survived, but his mind shattered, and he was sent away, locked in a facility. Anne's voice cracked as she said the town tried to forget, to bury the pain. Will's world tilted, his breath shallow as he asked the question burning in his throat. Was he Peter Ward? Anne's eyes filled with pity, her silence louder than any answer. She said he looked like Peter, sounded like him, but she couldn't be sure. She begged him to leave the house, to stop digging before it destroyed him. He staggered from her home, the journal heavy in his hands, the truth a weight he couldn't carry. He drove to the edge of town, his mind a storm of memories that weren't his, or were they? He saw flashes of that night, blood, screams, a man with a gun, his face shadowed. He pulled over, his hands gripping the wheel, his tears blurring the road. The house was calling him back, its voice a siren he couldn't resist. He returned to find Libby in the attic, staring at the box he'd uncovered. She didn't turn, didn't speak, her silhouette framed by the attic's single window. He asked what she was doing, his voice trembling with fear and need. She said she was remembering, her words soft but heavy, like stones in a river. He stepped closer, the journal slipping from his hands, its pages fluttering to the floor. She turned, her face pale, her eyes no longer hers but someone else's, someone lost. She said she loved him, always would, but her voice was a whisper from another life. He reached for her, but she stepped back, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. The house groaned, its walls trembling, as if alive with her sorrow. Will fell to his knees, the truth clawing at him. He wasn't Will Attenton, not entirely. He found a letter in the journal, tucked between its pages, written in his hand. It was addressed to Peter, a desperate note from a man fighting to hold on. It spoke of a killer, still free, hiding in the town's shadows. It begged Peter to remember, to fight, to protect what was left. Will's mind fractured, memories bleeding into the present. Libby's laugh, the girl's screams. He saw the night of the murders, clear as if he were there. The guns flash, the blood. He wasn't just Peter. He was the man who'd lost everything, trapped in a dream to escape. The house was his prison, his refuge, his tormentor, all at once. He clutched the letter, his resolve hardening, but the house's voice grew louder, drowning him. The dream house was no mirror. It was a grave, and he was buried alive. The November nights in Fairview grew darker, as if the stars themselves had fled. Will Attenton, or Peter Ward, stood in the attic of the colonial house, the journal's pages scattered at his feet. The letter he'd found, written in his own desperate hand, burned in his mind. A killer was still free. The scratches on the walls had spread. Their words: Peter, remember, murder, a chorus of accusation. The house pulsed around him, its groans no longer subtle but a roar, shaking the floorboards. Libby's voice called from downstairs, soft and lilting, but it carried a weight that wasn't hers. He clutched the letter, his heart a frantic drum, knowing he couldn't hide from the truth any longer. The dream house wasn't just a prison, it was a stage, and he was its broken actor. He descended the stairs, each step heavier, as if the house were pulling him into its depths. The air was thick, alive with whispers that weren't his, weren't human, weren't alive. Trish and Dee Dee were in the living room, curled together on the couch, silent. Their eyes, once bright, were shadowed, their small hands clutching each other tightly. Will knelt before them, his voice trembling as he asked if they were okay. Trish looked through him, her voice a whisper, saying the house wanted them to stay. Dee Dee's lips quivered, her words barely audible. The sad lady said he'd leave them. Will's chest tightened, his hands reaching for theirs, but they flinched, their touch cold. He saw it then in their eyes, a flicker, a fading, as if they were slipping away. Libby appeared, her smile gentle but wrong, her presence too soft, too fragile. She said they were fine, just tired, but her voice was a melody from a dream, not reality. He stood, his gaze locked on her, seeing her for what she was. Not his wife, not anymore. He followed her to the kitchen, the journal heavy in his hands, the truth ablaze in his heart. He asked her who she was, his voice raw, breaking under the weight of his fear. She paused, her hands still over a cutting board, a knife glinting in the dim light. She said she was Libby, his Libby, forever and always, her tone soft but unyielding. He shook his head, tears burning his eyes, and showed her the journal, the letter, the photo. Her face didn't change, but her eyes, those eyes he'd loved, were hollow, distant, gone. She stepped closer, her hand grazing his cheek, cold as winter's breath. She said she'd never leave him, that they'd stay together in the house, always. He recoiled, his mind screaming. She wasn't real, couldn't be. Not after what he'd read. The house shuddered, its walls creaking, as if mocking his realization, his loss. He ran to the basement, driven by a need to break the house's spell. The air was damp, heavy with the stench of mold and something sharper, metallic. He tore at the shelves, his hands bleeding as he uncovered a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was a box, its wood blackened, its contents a shrine to the past. Photos of Libby, Trish, Dee Dee, their faces smiling but marked with red ink, crossed out. A locket, Libby's, its chain broken, its photo inside faded but clear, her face, his love. A child's bracelet engraved with Trish's name, its beads cracked and dull. A note in Peter's handwriting. Find him. End it. Will's knees buckled, his sobs echoing in the dark, the truth crashing over him. They were gone, his family, murdered, and he'd built this dream to keep them alive. He saw it all now, the memories flooding back like a dam breaking. The night of the murders, 5 years ago, in this very house. Libby's screams, the girls' cries, the gun's deafening roar. He'd tried to save them, his hands slick with their blood, but he was too late. He'd survived, broken, sent to a hospital where his mind fractured. Will Attenton was a lie, a shield against the pain of being Peter Ward. Libby, Trish, Dee Dee, they were echoes, ghosts he'd conjured to fill the void. The house had fed his delusion, its walls weaving the dream to keep him trapped. He clutched the locket, its weight grounding him, his rage igniting through the grief. The killer was out there, and Peter would find him, no matter the cost. He went to Ann Patterson's house, the box of evidence under his arm, his resolve steel. She opened the door, her face pale, her eyes red from tears she wouldn't admit. He showed her the photos, the locket, the note, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her body sagging against the doorframe. She said she'd suspected, had always known something was wrong, but fear kept her silent. She spoke of her husband, Jack, his temper, his obsession with the Ward family. Jack had known Libby, had watched her, his jealousy a poison that festered. Anne's voice broke as she admitted he'd been strange after the murders, distant, haunted. Peter's blood ran cold, the name Jack a spark to his buried memories. He left Anne's house, the box heavy, his purpose clear. Jack was the shadow he'd been chasing. Back in the house, Libby was waiting, standing in the hallway, her form flickering. She was translucent now, her edges soft, like a memory fading in the light. Trish and Dee Dee stood behind her, their faces pale, their eyes full of love and sorrow. He fell to his knees, his voice breaking as he begged them to stay. Libby knelt beside him, her touch cold but gentle, her smile a flicker of the woman he'd loved. She said they were always with him, in his heart, but he had to let them go. Trish whispered that he was brave, that he'd find the man who hurt them. Dee Dee reached for his hand, her fingers passing through his, leaving only a chill. The house groaned, its walls trembling, as if angry at their departure. Peter wept, his heart shattering, but he nodded, knowing they were right. He found another clue in the basement, hidden in the box, a receipt, dated the night of the murders. It was from a hardware store, signed by Jack Patterson, for rope and a knife. Peter's hands shook, his rage a fire that burned away the last of his delusion. He saw Jack's face in his memories, the man with the gun, his eyes cold and unyielding. Jack had wanted Libby, had hated Peter for having her, and took everything in his madness. Peter clutched the receipt, his mind clear for the first time in years. The house was no longer his captor, it was his witness, its scars a map to justice. He stood, the locket in his pocket, his family's love a shield against the dark. He would face Jack, end the nightmare, and set his family free. The dream house was a tomb, but Peter was ready to claw his way out. The December wind howled through Fairview, carrying the promise of snow and endings. Peter Ward stood in the basement of the colonial house, the receipt from Jack Patterson crumpled in his fist. The locket, Libby's locket, hung heavy in his pocket, its broken chain a reminder of his loss. The scratches on the walls had stopped, their final message, justice, etched deep into the wood. The house was silent now, its pulse steady, as if waiting for the final act of its grim play. Peter's rage burned, a fire that had consumed his grief, his delusion, his fear. He saw Libby's face in his mind, her smile, her love, urging him to finish this. Trish and Dee Dee's laughter echoed in his heart, their courage a light in the dark. The dream house was no longer his captor, it was his ally, its scars a testament to truth. He climbed the stairs, each step a vow. Jack would pay, and his family would rest. The house felt different, its air clearer, as if the truth had loosened its grip. Peter gathered the evidence, the photos, the locket, the receipt, the note. He placed them in a bag, his hands steady despite the storm in his chest. He saw Libby one last time, standing in the hallway, her form faint but radiant. She was no longer a ghost, but a memory, her eyes full of love, not sorrow. Trish and Dee Dee stood beside her, their faces bright, their hands raised in a wave. He whispered their names, his voice breaking, his tears falling to the floor. They faded, their presence lingering in the air, a warmth that anchored him. The house sighed, its walls still, as if releasing a breath held for years. Peter wiped his eyes, the locket pressed against his heart. and walked out the door. He drove to Ann Patterson's house, the evidence bag heavy on the passenger seat. The town was quiet, its streets empty, as if holding its breath for what was to come. He knocked on Ann's door, his resolve a shield against the cold. She answered, her face gaunt, her eyes red from sleepless nights and guilt. He showed her the receipt, the photos, his voice calm but unyielding. She gasped, her hands trembling, her body sagging against the doorframe. She said Jack was home, in the garage, working late as he often did. Peter's blood surged, his memories of that night, Jack's face, the gun, sharper now. Ann begged him to call the police, to let them handle it, but Peter shook his head. This was his fight, his family's justice, and he would see it through. He found Jack in the garage, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. Jack was hunched over a workbench, a knife in his hand, its blade glinting in the dim light. Peter's heart pounded, his rage a tide that threatened to drown him. He called Jack's name, his voice steady, cutting through the hum of the garage. Jack turned, his face pale, his eyes narrowing with a mix of fear and defiance. Peter held up the receipt, the photos, the locket, each item a dagger in the silence. Jack laughed, a brittle sound, denying everything, his voice sharp with desperation. Peter stepped closer, the note in his hand, his words a blade. You killed them. Jack's smile vanished, his hands shaking, the knife slipping from his grip. The garage seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, as if the house itself had followed Peter. Jack lunged, his fists swinging, but Peter was ready, his grief a strength Jack couldn't match. They grappled, the workbench crashing, tools scattering across the concrete floor. Peter pinned Jack against the wall, his forearm pressing into Jack's throat. He demanded a confession, his voice raw, his eyes burning with 5 years of pain. Jack choked, his face red, his defiance crumbling under Peter's weight. He sobbed, his words spilling like blood. He'd loved Libby, wanted her, hated Peter. He'd gone to the house that night, his jealousy a poison, his gun a tool of madness. He'd shot Libby, Trish, Dee, sparing Peter to live with the torment. Peter's vision blurred, his tears mixing with rage, but he held Jack firm. The truth was out, a wound laid bare, and the house's whispers finally stilled. Ann appeared, her screams piercing the air, a phone in her hand. She'd called the police, her voice shaking as she begged Peter to stop. He released Jack, who collapsed, sobbing, his confession a chain around his soul. Peter stepped back, his chest heaving, the locket warm against his skin. The police arrived, their sirens a distant wail, their lights flashing through the garage. They cuffed Jack, his head bowed, his guilt a weight he couldn't escape. Ann wept, her apologies lost in the chaos, her world shattered by her husband's sins. Peter gave the evidence to the officers, his voice steady, his purpose fulfilled. He walked away, the garage fading behind him, the town waking to its buried truth. The dream house had demanded justice, and Peter had answered its call. He returned to the house one last time, the dawn breaking over Fairview's frost. The colonial stood quiet, its ivy soft in the morning light, its menace gone. He stepped inside, the air clean, the walls bare of scratches, the whispers silent. He saw Libby, Trish, and Dee in the living room, their forms glowing, at peace. Libby smiled, her hand reaching for his, her touch a memory, not a chill. Trish laughed, her voice a melody, saying he'd done it, he'd set them free. Dee hugged him, her warmth real for a moment, her love eternal. They faded, their light lingering, a promise that they'd always be with him. Peter left the house, the locket in his pocket, his heart heavy but whole. The dream house was just a house now, its story told, its ghosts at rest. Peter never returned to Fairview, but he carried his family with him. He wrote a book, not the novel he'd planned, but a memoir for Libby, Trish, Dee. It was their story, their love, their light, etched in words that would never fade. The town spoke of the dream house in whispers, some calling it cursed, others healed. It stood empty, its windows dark, its walls silent, a monument to truth. Peter found peace, not in forgetting, but in remembering. in honoring their lives. He walked through the world, the locket his anchor, their love his guide. The nightmare was over, the dream no longer a trap, but a memory of what mattered. He'd faced the dark, fought the shadows, and emerged into the light. The dream house had been his crucible, and he was forged anew. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support brings these tales to life, keeping the shadows alive for all to hear. Join us for more journeys into the heart of mystery and truth. Until next time, beware the houses that dream and the secrets they keep.